Good morning everyone and welcome along to the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat second seminar for 2016. My name's John Fleet. I'm the current chair of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat Australia Brisbane Council. It's getting harder and harder to say that. But on behalf of our committee and our sponsors for today's breakfast, ARAPS, it's my pleasure to welcome here this morning, this lovely autumn morning. It's great to see everybody here. This year we're exploring the idea of the changing face of Brisbane, and a great opportunity to talk about a great variety of projects and issues around the city. But it's quite amazing. You look back over just the recent history. In 2004 there was 950,000 people in Brisbane. Last year there was 1.14 million. They're predicting, 1.14 million. In 2036 we're going to reach 1.4 million in Brisbane, but add in the greater Brisbane region it's up to 3.3 million, so that it's going to change the city enormously. Currently our population is 75% of the population is between 15 and 64. They keep talking about 64s getting older in, but there's 11.4% of the population is over 65 at the moment and increasing. 1/3 of us are between 25 and 44. 28% of people in Brisbane are classed as immigrants by this survey, and only 54% of households had 2 cars, which I was surprised at. I thought there must be more households than that with 2 cars. All these changes obviously have a huge impact on our built environment and the way that the city's developing and evolving. You look out around the city at the moment, there's how many cranes are on the horizon. They're obviously all building residential projects. So Brisbane is changing radically today, and it'll be quite different in a couple of years' time. Today we're looking at designing the subtropical high-rise city. So Brisbane City Council predicts there'll be 50 new high-rise buildings need to be built in the next 20 years to accommodate the predicted growth. This is an opportunity to change how Brisbane uses high-rise and how high-rise evolve. And BCC have been very clear about the opportunity to realise a vision of a subtropical city that breathes. And architects, who are presenting today, have been road testing this vision through urban design and architectural projects. So we've got Carolyn Stalker and Elizabeth Watson-Brown from Architectus this morning presenting projects that they've been working on to exemplify how this breathable building and the city will change over the next few years, or the next 20 years. And particularly at the end we're going to have a look at 443 Queen Street, which is developing for CBUS. And at the end of the session we're going to have Michelle Fitzgerald from CBUS up to answer some questions. So we've got all 3 presenters here to have a discussion at the end. I'll give you formal introductions to Carolyn Stalker and Elizabeth Watson-Brown just before they get up and speak. Sorry. Events like today aren't possible without sponsors, and as I mentioned, ARAP are very generously sponsoring today. ARAP are a firm of independent designers, planners, engineers, consultants and technical specialists offering a broad range of professional services. Founded in 1946 with a focus on structural engineering, ARAP first came to world attention during the structure for the Sydney Opera House. Following that, they worked on buildings like the Pompidou Centre. ARAP has since grown into a truly multidisciplinary organisation with strong reputation for delivering innovation and sustainable designs. ARAP brings together a broad-minded range of individuals and are all encouraging to look beyond their speciality. They have an unconventional approach to their unconventional approach to design springs apart from their ownership structure. The firm is owned by a board of trustees on behalf of the staff, so quite a unique structure, and this leads to a very independent spirit that reflects in the firm's work and their dedicated pursuit of technical excellence. So thank you, ARAPS, for presenting. Craig Gibson will be up here later to give the vote of thanks at the end of the session. Format for today is as per usual, except our screen is very high today. So apologies to those at the front row. We tried a different screen today, but normally it's down here where you can touch and feel it, but it feels a bit lost up there. But hopefully you'll be able to still see it all. So the normal format, I'll sit down shortly, you'll get to have your breakfast, we'll get back up about 5 to 8 and do the formal introductions and start the presentations and have you back on your way to the office by 9 o'clock. Our next seminar on the Changing Face of Brisbane is here on the 28th of July, and we'll have Noel Robinson from NRA Collaborative discussing Brisbane Sky Tower, probably our next big building at 274 metres or 90 levels and over 1,130 apartments, so a monster building. So look out for that in early July. As usual, you can join the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat online for $150 US, and that gets you access to all the information online. And as usual, we try and collect a bit of news off the website, but I guess the big bit of news for our local committee, as I mentioned, we've changed from the Australian Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat to the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat Australia, which has taken about 3 years to get all the legal things to happen, but now we are organised, and we had our first committee meeting face-to-face with Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne committees all present, so it's been a milestone for us coming along, so we're quite proud that we actually managed to do it, and the Americans are very pleased we did it as well. From the website, the things that caught my attention this week, obviously there's a phase around the world of super tall, thin buildings. Brisbane's getting Australia's second skinniest tower. It's a 9 metre wide residential tower planned on 466 Ann Street. It's designed by Rothy Lohman for a developer by the name of Tea Tree Development Groups. Today there's a theme. All the developers I've picked have unusual names. I was quite surprised. But this tower is 9 metres wide but 37 stories tall. Australia's narrowest tower in Melbourne, the Phoenix Apartments, which are under construction now, are 6.7 metres wide but 28 stories. So quite a difference in scale and height. The site for this building in Ann Street is only 468 square metres, so they're getting 65 two-bedroom apartments on this little site, and for the architects in the room, the car parking is a series of 2 elevators and a car stacker, so it's a very interesting, when you look at the podium and basement, how they squeeze all those cars into that small site. The thinnest building still in the world is going to be New York City's 111 West 57th Street, which is 13.7 metres wide but 82 stories, so very, very slender and wobbly buildings. Everybody remembers Brisbane talks about the Gold Tower being the first sort of modern building in Brisbane, one of the first modern buildings in Brisbane. Rothy Lohman, again, the same architects as that previous building, are working on this one on the corner of Elizabeth Street and Edward Street, again filling in that piece on the corner. But this one is going to be, it's got 647 apartments. They're not quite as big as Noel Robinson's scheme. But again, the city is changing. There's all these buildings promoted. This one's been anchored by some very high-end retail tenancies on the ground floor, which is going to be interesting. That developer is Arias, a very simple name, so it's not one of the more kooky ones out there. Jean Nouveau, who was responsible for One Central Park in Sydney, has now moved into Melbourne, and this is quite an interesting building. The next 2 projects, both in Melbourne, done by international architects, both really pushing the plot ratio. Melbourne's having a lot of discussion about density and size of apartments and things, but this one here is done by Sterling Global, is a developer, which I thought was quite simple. It's on 38 Latrobe Terrace. It's a reasonably large site, but the plot ratio they're targeting here is 29:1. So last year the planning authorities in Melbourne came out and said 24:1 is as much as we want, and this recently they've wound it back down to 18:1, so they're trying to bring that density down. But the developers of this site are saying they've designed to the 24:1 plus some bonus plot ratios, so it'll be interesting to see how they go through the final approval. But a third of the site's given over to public realm, public access that wasn't there in the original as it is at the moment. But Jean Nouveau is on the record, obviously he's the Pulitzer Prize winning architect, but he says you can't design to rules. You've got to look at the context of the site, the geography, the history, and work with the developer. So he doesn't like to follow rules, and I guess One Central Park doesn't follow the rules either. It pushes all those boundaries. And the second one in Melbourne, it's got sky gardens and things happening all the way up, and each facade is a different colour responding to its orientation and the neighbourhood apparently. But obviously we're all saddened the passing of Zaha Hadid on the 1st of April. This building's been around for a little while, but it's on the verge of being approved. It pushes the plot ratio only to 28, I think it is. So not going really hard, but the design driver here they're saying was this idea of vases stacked on top of each other and blurring the podium into the tower. But the interesting one for this one, so the state government approves things. It got referred to the Melbourne Future Committee, which is part of the council. There's 11 councillors meant to sit on the committee to review and make comment on this design. Of the 11, 2 were sick, 5 said they had a conflict of interest and couldn't comment on it. So that left 4 people that said they didn't have a quorum to approve it, so it went straight back to the state government for approval, and the council missed out on their opportunity to comment on it. So interesting planning processes in Melbourne compared to in Brisbane. Apparently the council is happy with it. They support the design in principle. It says it's got better apartments than most buildings. There's no zippered apartments in there, or saddlebags they refer to it in here, and they generally support the plot ratios not too far over the limit. So it'll be interesting to see if Zaha's first building gets approved in Australia. It certainly makes it, I guess, with her passing, makes it important to get her buildings built that have been designed to date. And obviously we've got 2 of those on the way in Brisbane, hopefully, or possibly. Changing the scale a little bit, in moving back to Sydney. This is across the road from One Central Park, the University of Technology in Sydney. I guess people often think this is one of the main gateways to Sydney. It's sort of considered one of the ugliest buildings in Sydney that on the site at the moment. But this is a scheme that's been put forward out for public comment of how they're going to change the site. the description here by the university, they're spending $1 billion on the precinct, developing the master plan and redeveloping the campus. They see this as their gateway, and the idea of the glass veil to the front is very, very evocative. Couldn't see many columns holding up all those sinuous bits. It's certainly an interesting solution, and it will certainly create a very interesting gateway. Be interested to see what happens in the public realm in terms of discussion in Sydney. Will it be supported or not? What I liked about this one is the next article on the website was a MAD design for Paris. Again, Paris, very conservative architecture, a really cool curvy building on some of their other works. But this one is right next to Martin Luther King Park, if you know where that is, in the middle of Paris, next door to Renzo Piano's courthouse they're building at the moment. It's quite a unique part of Paris. The design ethos here was to create an organic building that folded the park up into the tower. So it's sort of interesting to see how these buildings are evolving. And the last thing that caught my attention was the world's fastest elevator. Mitsubishi Electric are developing what they claim to be the world's fastest elevator, 20.6 metres per second when it's at full flight. So that's 5 floors every second. I just can't imagine how fast that is. The giant drop at Dreamworld, if you bet on that, falls at twice that speed, so you're sort of held in. So when they're going down at 20.6 metres per second, it'll be interesting to see if you actually keep your feet on the floor. They had to develop extra strong wires, they're saying here, and because of the speed and the amount of energy, it certainly generates a lot of power. So doing it as 2 lifts, and they more or less generate self-generating in power, the words are saying. It has, to further increase the safety, elevators equipped with multi-stage shock absorbers, emergency stop devices, speed governors and other safety devices. To get to that sort of speed and reduce the turbulence, it's actually got like streamlining top and bottom, so it's like a little, I guess, a rocket ship going up and down inside the capsule. And it's also equipped with devices that reduce the air pressure in the car, so you don't get that feeling of discomfort as you accept like you get on and take off in an aircraft. But we'll see how that actually works. So the building is 632 metres tall, or 119 stories, 53 seconds from the bottom to the top and stopped again. And if you go online and Google elevator speeds, there's a great little diagram of all the world's tallest building in real time, and it has a race between the elevators, and it's really interesting to see how fast this one is compared to everybody else. So it's worth having a look at. All right, so that's from news from the council. If you want to get that news first-hand every day or every week, you should sign up and become a member. I'll sit down and let you have your breakfast. I'll be back at 5 to 8 to kick off the formal parts. Thanks, guys. So we have 2 speakers presenting first up this morning. The first person is going to be Carolyn Stalker, Director from Architectus. Carolyn is a highly regarded designer, communicator and leader of teams for complex architectural and urban master planning projects. Her career spans 27 years and has involved a range of projects around the globe. She demonstrates a sustained passion for enhancing people's connection to the natural world and each other through design. This has been recognised over many years through numerous architectural and planning awards and government advisory roles. Carolyn has recently been designing breathable and green integrated tower developments and is a member of the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat Committee, Design Committee. She's also an adjunct professor of the School of Design and Creative Industries at Queensland University of Technology. Carolyn has served and chaired many juries in both architectural and urban design awards. Oops, I've said that before. Carolyn's presentation today is based on a presentation she did last year at the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat Conference in New York. So I'm looking forward to seeing her. I didn't get to go over last year. And just to save time, I'll do Elizabeth's introduction as well now so we can roll through the presentations. Elizabeth Watson-Brown is the Design Director at Architectus. Prior to being appointed Design Director of Architectus Brisbane in 2011, Elizabeth Watson-Brown directed her own practice for 21 years. Highly regarded for exemplar place response and socially responsible design, Elizabeth has been in receipt of many major architectural awards. Elizabeth has been an active participant in architecture and urban design discourse in many public roles, a member of the Queensland Board of Urban Places and lecturer and writer, adjunct professor of architecture at the University of Queensland as well. Elizabeth's work has been exhibited in many places, including the Gallery of Modern Art and the Venice Biennale. So first up will be Carolyn and followed by Elizabeth.
Thank you, John. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Good. That's great. So I'm going to address the first part of Elizabeth and my presentation today, focusing on urban spaces for tall buildings in a subtropical city. And really this is the accumulation, I guess, of several years' thinking and how we've been approaching projects and putting that together in the context of what might be an alternative future for Brisbane's city centre, and how we design the city centre over the next, and implement the city centre over the next 20 years. And then Elizabeth's going to talk about a fabulous project that is an incredible exemplar of the possibilities of working with our locale and our fabulous climate. So this work really comes out of an interest in engaging with this subtropical condition both locally but internationally. And many of the world's fastest growing cities are located in subtropical climatic zones in India, Vietnam, Africa, Latin America, Thailand and southern China. And as pressure to urbanise rapidly within these very condensed geographic areas is driving the creation of a very dense urban form, there's very intense pressure that's placed on natural systems and energy resources. The great thing about Brisbane is that we share this climate with these places, and we can be a kind of a crucible for ideas and good practice for global urbanisation at higher density. And the other great thing about Brisbane is that we have this climate and this place that it actually has ideal preconditions for more sustainable development, in the fact that the benign conditions of our environment mean that we have the ability to create low energy buildings quite simply, and we have the ability to grow vegetation profusely very easily, and the right kind of rainfall and climatic conditions to create a greener urbanism and to bring green into our urbanism. And these are, which is great, which means that we can really establish urban ecologies within our higher density environments, as well as essential nature connection. However, we are overall generally still building 20th century cities for 21st century circumstances. And if we look at the challenges of the 21st century and building cities in the 21st century, they are primarily around ecological sustainability and our huge population growth. And I won't talk about, transport and cars and city forms, but I will talk about the fact that the podium and tower form remains the dominant solution for how we're doing high density cities around the world. It's been really interesting to be engaged with the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat over the last couple of years, because this podium and tower form is quite clearly being challenged by architects and designers and developers who want to see alternate models and more sustainable models for a more vertical urbanism around the world. Interestingly, we may also have similar opportunities here in Brisbane. And for a city of its size, we're experiencing something of a high-rise boom. If you put it in the broader context over 20 years, maybe not this very year, but with 50 new high-rise projects projected by Brisbane City Centre for this over the next 20 years by Brisbane City Council. The transformative impacts of these 50 towers could be enormous, and we actually mapped 50 hypothetical sites, demonstrating that in 20 years our city centre could be radically different as a consequence. There is immense opportunity inherent in this 20-year project to recast Brisbane as a city who maximises her natural climatic advantages by making a porous, green urban mesh of rooms, people, places and spaces offering landscaped respite, ecological connection and interaction, fully embracing our lovely subtropical setting. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about today, and the kinds of changes in thinking that we need to embrace to deliver that. When the Centre for Subtropical Design was established, it undertook a really interesting community survey around southeast Queensland, asking people what are their key environmental values about living in southeast Queensland. And the two words that kept coming up again and again were openness and a relationship to landscape. That's what people love about living here. And this is what you could actually articulate as the subtropical experience. And this idea of a clear openness and relationship to landscape has been a touchstone in architecture's projects for as long as I've been associated with the practice, which is 12 years. And we constantly look at ways that we can deliver that through all kinds of different project types. And I guess if you think back to where that experience, that familiar experience comes from, I don't want to get too romantic about the Queenslander because it's not perfect, but it does have some essential qualities that have really been starting to inform our thinking about the subtropical experience. David Malouf, in his beautiful book 12 Edmonston Street, described Queenslanders as airy, open, often with no doors between the rooms. They are on such easy terms with breezes, with the thick foliage they break into at window level, with the lives of possums and flying foxes, that living in them, barefoot for the most part, is like living in a reorganised rainforest. And that's the thing that we love about these buildings. That's not necessarily the way they look, but the experience of being in them. They offer that capacity to moderate and fine-tune our relationship to the outside, but also give us that nature connection, which is, there's been so much research that demonstrates how beneficial that is to human well-being. And I guess really then can we think about how we could imagine or reinvest some of these qualities in the city centre? And certainly that's what Brisbane City Council has been talking about doing over the last few years. And the city centre master plan has very clearly expressed the desire to reinvest attributes of the subtropical vernacular and the subtropical experience in our high-rise buildings within the city centre. And it really foreshadows this transformation of the city over the next 20 years, highlighting the need for a well-designed tropical city. It talks about ideas of leafy outdoor lifestyle for our public spaces, and importantly, the notion of buildings that breathe. And there's been some great work done on this compendium of buildings that breathe. And applying these concepts to tall buildings in Brisbane clearly has some work to be done to it, and we're looking for how this is going to play out. I understand that the draft design guide is being finalised. It may have moved forward since then, and exemplar projects are certainly on the drawing board. But what we're seeing is, as the early translation of these concepts is shown in these figures. The podium is articulated to create an urban veranda zone with recesses for gardens and shaded edges. But I'd like to point out that the fundamental form is still a podium aligning the street edge. And I believe that there's a fundamental issue with the adoption of the podium as a solution for moving forward. Podium have been important devices for city planners throughout the 20th century to achieve street scale and active edges. But as we move into the 21st century with our ecological challenges, we really need to think differently about these. In Brisbane, we have a particular condition where we have quite narrow streets. We have 21 metres between property boundaries, and that 21 metres is jam-packed with services, buses, cars, pedestrians, awnings, driveways and signage, limiting options for generous planting and water-sensitive urban design. When our city was rebuilt in the 80s and 90s, it was based on podium towers, podiums lining the street edge. And all of the activities of the public realm really crammed into this 21-metre zone between the buildings. We do have within the city centre some generous public spaces of respite in our botanical gardens, River's Edge and Post Office Square, and they are heavily used. However, the public experience of the heart of the city centre is largely defined by these podia aligning the grid, with the public realm as the leftover spaces between. And the enclosure of the podia at the perimeter means that these deep planned spaces can be very energy hungry as well. Our streets and buildings in the city can become urban heat islands in the summer, with the centre of the city often being the hottest part of our metropolitan region. And in Brisbane, if you watch the behaviour of Brisbaneites in the summer, we seek shade and breezes in the summer when we're outside, or we just stay in the air conditioning. And if you see, and you often see people doing what this gentleman's doing in this photograph, which is standing in shade of light poles while you're waiting to cross the street, which is definitely a warm climate habit. In winter, Brisbaneites seek the warming sun and the gorgeousness of our blue winter skies, and as it warms up today, we'll all be wanting to do that. Our city doesn't provide for these needs in a generous way. In summer, the small green refuges of our city are popular. In winter, a small number of sunny spaces attract daytime use. By contrast, our inner city suburbs have retained a kind of adapted ecology that runs through our valleys, our steep slopes, backyards and our parks, with our beautiful large spreading figs and our gardens and colourful planting and deep green shade. In building the next generation of high-rises, this urban ecology could be re-established as part of the experience and ecological functioning of the city centre through the integration of habitat. At present, within the public realm, our narrow streets and podia leave little room for the accommodation of this kind of experience at the ground plane level. With our constrained streets and our paucity of urban green, as we rebuild the city, there's a real opportunity to open up the ground plane to accommodate planting, water-sensitive urban design and green, I believe, beyond what is articulated within the podium diagram of Brisbane City Council's City Centre Master Plan. But in saying that, I acknowledge that we really then need to think creatively and practically about parking, servicing, structure, street edges and activation and creating safe and livable streets. And move away from this big blocks of unresponsive air-conditioned volume. We need some new typologies. We need some different solutions to the bases of buildings. We need to radically rethink that, creating new urban space typologies. And this is really the work that we've been doing over the years. Coming back to the Queenslander, both the front veranda and the undercroft have climatic spatial properties that could inform how tall buildings meet the ground. The Queenslander architecture typically creates an elevated platform for living. The veranda, when ideally oriented, can catch the winter sun and the cooling summer breezes. The undercroft, often surrounded by vegetation and screens, is on a very hot day the coolest place to be. And David Malouf talked about the undercrofts as a place of cool mystery. It's a cool pool of air where the heat is kept out by the layers of insulation around it, formed by the building. In heat waves, the insulated and protected nature of the undercroft makes it often the place of last refuge in a non-air conditioned environment. Cool urban spaces can be created under towers. Podia terraces can be created as green verandas to the city. Filtered edges can be made that create inside-outside rooms, and pools of vegetation can be created to store cool air and retreat spaces. And what I'm going to present now is 4 typologies or alternate typologies from podia that are around this notion of integrating subtropical experience and ecological function in the base of the building. And they're ideas that we've been trying out on projects over the years. First of all, the step garden terrace. The notion that a garden terrace can be created at the base of a building that can be accommodated by splitting of car parking to accommodate deep planting zones on the street, but also folding the green up onto the first level of the city is something that we've explored in a number of different projects. In this project in the north of the city, we were really looking at the idea of creating an elevated platform that captured breezes and faced the right direction for some winter sun, but then also made a breezy entrance to the commercial uses and residential buildings above. And so that was that idea very much of a porous ground plane folding up and being able to accommodate. Importantly, this would be an activated space, not a passive space. So there'd be retail on the street level, but also retail cascading down this terrace. And that was a first typology we've been exploring. The second typology is the notion of an urban undercroft. Open undercroft spaces in tall buildings can provide ideal subtropical retreat spaces, offering deep shade, allowing breezes to flow through, deep planting zones around the edge, and spaces for water gardens. And exploring this typology, you can look at levels to create, changing levels to create privacy. Again, you can activate this more open garden space with pods and really achieve that cool retreat within the undercroft of the tower and within an urban plaza. The subtropical loggia was another typology that we looked at, and a loggia is a well-known Mediterranean climatic adaptation, providing shelter from hot sun and winter rains. Profound improvements to the ground plane of the experience of the city could be made with deep shaded edges, occupied edges along the street. Subtropical loggias, calibrated to accommodate trees, screening, water gardens and microclimatic adjustments that enable people in the city to find places of shelter or places in the sun. And this project in the west of the city, which is a hotel and mixed-use project, enabled us to explore that idea of a subtropical loggia where the hospitality spaces could actually occupy this garden terrace, and again a fine screen to make those adjustments to your western or eastern frontage. And finally, the notion of an urban mesh of laneways and courtyards. So shady laneways combined with courtyards that catch winter sun could be woven into the ground plane as a mesh of subtropical spaces. A mixed-use project in the southeastern corner of the city provided the opportunity to look at a porous mesh of people spaces, both in plan and section, throughout the block: laneways, courtyards, podium gardens and sky gardens, providing a network of green, cool and open spaces throughout the entire site. So if you start to put those ideas in combination with the notion of breathable buildings and a different approach to the base of the building, you can really imagine quite a different sort of city over 20 years. It's a city that would be shaped by an urban experience of green streets, lively garden terraces, pleasant urban verandas, vibrant green undercrofts, subtropical loggias and green cool pools of air, all topped by green buildings that breathe. This would really be a city to remember, to identify with, a subtropical city of the ecological age. And through the reconceptualisation of the base and ground plane of the 50 towers over 20 years, this could really be the urban experience of Brisbane. So we took that idea of the 4 different podia and said, well, we could actually apply those principles to different types of sites. So the urban undercroft, for example, might be a fantastic typology for the edge of parks, so you get that connection and flow through. The step garden terrace, for example, might be a fantastic typology for the river edge, so you get that, you get your feet out of the flood zone, but you get that lovely elevated veranda. The urban mesh laneways and courtyards might be a great typology, for instance, for deeper blocks, and the subtropical loggia could be a great typology for east and west orientated smaller sites within the city, so that you get that ability to screen those building-based spaces from the sun. And so that little diagram on the left shows how we hypothetically mapped where those different typologies could occur. And then we had a look at the cumulative effect of all of those within the city. And the diagram on the left is the current Nolly plan, which is basically the built form to open space plan. And the diagram on the right shows the cumulative effect of those 50 different tower typologies that I just described within the city. And you start to see an altogether more porous city that's really could, over time, in concert with the creation of buildings that breathe, really recast Brisbane as a subtropical city for the ecological age. So to be really clear, the spaces in the bases of these buildings are not publicly owned, or it's not envisaged that they are publicly owned or managed. They are the spaces of the commerce of the city, the retail spaces, the dining terraces, the circulation spaces, foyer arrival spaces, all the spaces at the base of a building that have commercial value. The difference is they're conceived as being open, not enclosed, inviting patronage, and that is the great luxury that we have in this climate, to make spaces like that and to bring a habitat into those spaces. Flexibility in thinking is important. The insistence that a street must be made up of a line of glazing along the property boundary is an idea that has its foundation, I would argue, in 20th century urbanism. But in the ecological age, activation can be provided in the way that retail is integrated into gardens, in the way people move through spaces, in how they're lit and managed. It doesn't necessarily have to be through that simple architectural solution. I guess, pulling all of this together shows that we clearly think that urban and public spaces need to be the particular focus of big ideas about making subtropical city. This is the part of tall buildings that most people experience, where the really big urban impacts are felt. There's huge opportunities presented by our very benign climatic conditions to create these new models and typologies. Moving towards such an aspiration really requires strong vision and practical measures to achieve it. In Brisbane, the vision is clearly articulated in the City Centre Master Plan. The practical delivery of this will be through partnership approach with progressive developers who understand the commercial returns in making people places that people love to be. Successful places attract people, which is fantastic for long-term value and patronage. And so I'm really incredibly proud as a Director of Architectus to be able to introduce this project, which is an absolutely extraordinary exemplar of the kinds of principles that we've been talking about and thinking about, and potentially Brisbane's first breathable building. So I'd like to invite Elizabeth Watson-Brown to the stage to talk about this project.
Great, thanks so much, Caro. Can everyone hear me? You've certainly set the scene, Caro, and explained the sort of global context and the local context in which we sit. And, our vision, I suppose, for what we like to call the new subtropical city, the new world subtropical city. And you can see, after listening to Caro, how interested we are in the sort of UH, urban habitat element of the CTBUH initiatives. But as Caro said, as we build our city for the ecological age, we can see great opportunity in Brisbane city centre, as Carolyn outlined, to open up the ground plane, to create shade and to allow the permeation of breezes, greenery and, importantly, people. Not just buildings that breathe, but in fact a city that breathes. So in reference to the TB aspect of the CTBUH, I'm going to talk this morning about the proposed project at 443 Queen Street, which does sit in that wider context of the vision for the subtropical city, and in the broader context, as Caro explained, of great global possibilities and a future in the subtropical zone. And I think, and I won't dwell too much on this because Caro talked a little bit about this, but we certainly in our design always start with the best aspects of the subtropical city. And to do that, we do need a real understanding of the subtropical condition. It's critical that we do develop an urban environment and an architectural response that actually capitalises on the salubriousness of our climate, and Caroline very poetically described that, and all of those Maluthian kind of qualities of the buildings that we love to live in. But thereby, obviously, the major point about this is that we radically reduce energy use. And we think in our city we can actually create exemplars for sustainable design in some of the fastest growing areas of the planet. That's why it's critical. So it's not just about individual buildings in our place, it's actually about the influence they might have in terms of the development of the planet. And in global terms, about 1/3 of people actually live in the cold to cool temperate zones. You can see that on the top map, and depend on heating in winter. 1/4 live in the hot, humid equatorial zone, and another quarter live in the hot, arid zones where cooling is desirable for a substantial part of the year. But we, in Australia, our whole continent is located largely outside these extremes of temperature. So we've got a very, very particular and special condition here that we need to take advantage of. And we like to say that Brisbane's different. And looking in greater detail at Australia, the Bureau of Meteorology actually agrees with that. Sort of like Goldilocks porridge, we're not too hot, we're not too cold, we're just right. In time with climate change, Goldilocks might need to move a little bit further south, but for the moment she's quite happy and comfortable here. So in the much finer grain analysis by BOM, it shows that our particular balance of temperature and humidity is localised to very sweet spots. the Australian mid-east coast and the highland areas of our tropical hinterland, and we're there in the centre of that sweet spot. So looking at the global scale, and Caroline spoke about this, we find the environmental conditions we enjoy are shared with east coast regions on 5 continents, which is very interesting. We're fortunate that 1/6 of the world's population also lives in this warm subtropical zone, and that's the place of many burgeoning cities and growth regions of Brazil, northeast India and southeast China, as Caroline mentions. So this provides the sort of larger context for how we think about our project in Brisbane. So I'm going to be presenting the Queen Street project. I've framed this talk about the project around the structure of the Brisbane City Centre's important Buildings That Breathe initiative that Caroline spoke about. And we're certainly really happy that this advocacy of breathing architecture, which is the culmination of much thought and collective endeavour by a lot of individuals in this room over the years, it's very heartening to see it now embedded in policy, and this is a major step change and major positive move in terms of the future of the city. This is a great response to the context we've just described, and we think, if properly interpreted, we believe it could lead to a new generation of design for subtropical living, and certainly a new vision for Brisbane, as Caroline described so well. So place is definitely the key to the way we think about architecture, and like many design professionals in this room, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Brisbane as a place, its landscape, its architecture and the way we live. And the way we think about designing in this space, Brisbane itself is the inspiration. So CBUS Property Development Manager Michelle Fitzgerald, who's here this morning, is an architect with a deep knowledge, experience and commitment to the architecture of this city. She saw the great value in a joint collaboration between architects and WOHA, who are undisputed global innovators of green urban buildings for warm climates, and in fact, not necessarily with their permission. You see images of a lot of their projects peppered through the Brisbane City Council documentation talking about green building. So it's, their architecture is a real exemplar for this. And in fact, at this minute, I was just speaking to Richard Hassel the other day, they are presenting a remarkable exhibition at the Venice Biennale and launching their new book, which talks about the future of cities and the urban environment in the subtropical and tropical realms, and I commend it to you. So they've obviously been thinking about that and acting on it for many years. So we established immediately a really good 50-50 design collaboration, a great partnership, Richard and I as joint design directors of this project. He's a very generous and nice man, merging his international experience with our knowledge of the local culture, developed over many years of work in Brisbane on residential projects and others. Richard is certainly a great architect and he's a really nice man, he's a good friend, and we share a deep concern for the future of these burgeoning tropical and subtropical cities, and obviously also these days Australia's links to the world in the Asian century and the ecological age. So these very early sketches give a quick introduction to the key ideas we were pursuing in this building. The form was conceived not as a single enclosed tower, but a cluster of vertical prisms tied together by open arrival gardens at each level. And these words in quotations are actually straight out of the Brisbane City Centre master plan aspirations, with which we obviously concur and we were responding to in this design. Substantial planting was a key, wrapping the lower open spaces and continuing right up the tower. This gave a very porous building, a tower in a plaza, with much greater opportunity to experience the environment. Excavating basement parking would have been problematic. You can see in these diagrams the sort of testing and thinking we were engaging in at the beginning. And obviously there are problems with that on the river edge site, but we believe generally problems with that, just in terms of energy consumption. So significantly elevating the parking, we could create that very generous public realm, the sort of area that Caroline was talking about. The resulting form actually generates a public realm, in this case, an area equal to 76% of the site area, which is very rare. The area of landscape space is close to twice that of the site area in the building, and the community spaces on the site are equal to nearly twice the area of the site. So these are all really radical moves, we feel, But we do think it sets a kind of a benchmark for discussion about how you actually make generous subtropical spaces in our city. Compared to a sort of a more compact plan form, an example of which is shown on the left of how you might approach doing a building on this particular site, we were able to pursue full natural cross-ventilation to every single apartment. Again, we think this is a really critical thing to try and achieve. It's not always an easy thing to achieve. It was certainly something right from this very early concept stage that we were very, very passionate about pursuing and achieving. By opening out the plans, we could also achieve, and you can see the plan comparisons here between a more standard floor plate and a porous and open floor plate. We could also pursue a much wider and more dramatic arc of view from each apartment in this apartment building. So as I said, I'm going to explain the project in terms of each of the 8 buildings that breathe elements set out in the Brisbane City Centre Master Plan, not just because they're now formalised there, but because we actually hold them dear. They're principles at the very core of the design values of both Architectus and obviously WOHA. So orientate yourself. This is a marvellous site, obviously. The position of it is phenomenal. So in the context of this project, we believe we've helped to orientate the building and its users and the public and the city on this remarkable site, and we believe that this has the potential also to orientate the city itself. It's on this key site on the banks of the Brisbane River with all sorts of amazing kind of connections. It almost acts as a gateway, a landmark entry to the CBD from the valley, and it's a great vantage and connection point for the city. It is an important location at the sort of nexus of the city streets and the river edge, a vantage point, as I said, for some of the most powerful symbols of the city, the river, the Story Bridge Customs House and its fig tree Kangaroo Point cliffs. It is visible, potentially, connected, potentially, and open, potentially. So the design that we've come up with is organised to clearly place us where we are at on that site, both physically, culturally and historically. And we think that this precinct links that earlier colonial city to the aspiring New World city of today. So the key strategy in the urban realm, and very much aligned with the philosophies and ideas that Caroline was explaining earlier, is to radically reduce the footprint of the building to the absolute minimum. So you can see on that ground plane plan, that's the Queen Street level plan, the donut-shaped thing is the most compact double helix car ramp that we can use to get the cars up on the site. An extremely tight entry lobby is the only sort of private space, if you like, and that's shown in white on that plan, the lobby and the core. And the rest of the space on that ground level and that Queen Street level is absolutely accessible public open space and garden space, placed as it is on that site to maximise the views to the river and to the Story Bridge and access from the city to the river. So we see this proposal as a link rather than a barrier between the city and the river. And so just to kind of illustrate that, we undertook a series of studies contrasting our project with the current impacts of the existing building on the site, the colonial building. And we certainly believe that this proposal offers a far more open, accessible and indeed orientating public realm than that exists at present. So you can see existing conditions on the left and the proposal on the right from various vantage points, and these were critical vantage points as well in terms of the city centre master plan. So there's the kind of footpath pedestrian experience existing on the left and the new building on the right, which is really not building at that level. We see it as parkland and public space with that transcendent view to the bridge there. View from across the road, down the Fig Tree Lane to the river. The view from the other end of Queen Street towards the site. Frontage onto Admiralty Towers Park and from Kangaroo Point. So in terms of occupying outdoor spaces, again, that plan, again, with our ideal climatic conditions, we think this site offers the ideal opportunity to develop a really vibrant and generously connected public realm. A kind of a landscaped canopy hangs above an urban veranda, if you like, and Caroline explained the sort of beneficence of that beautiful condition of living on a veranda somewhere, that condition somewhere between inside and outside, which is such a beautiful condition to enjoy in Queensland, and also that condition of, you know, under the house, that mysterious underworld, if you like, that's so shady and cool and breezy. So here you can see really generous new public walkways, gatherings places, viewing places and active places, achieved by, as I said, minimising that footprint of the building at the Queen Street level and raising and shaping the superstructure to absolutely maximise those views and generate a lot of shade. We think the new development's going to vitalise that whole precinct by increasing the activity in Admiralty Towers Park and the Riverside Boardwalk, and Howard Lane beside the historic stone wall. We think it also sets up quite a strong relationship with the 480 Queen Street building opposite, completing that connection set up through that site from St John's Cathedral to the Riverside. So we think that it's all about actually being dignified and respectful in its context and opening up the city to the river. That's what we see as the purpose of this site and this development. Car access is absolutely restricted to the existing service lane and the crossover. This ensures absolutely minimal disturbance again to the streetscape, historic structures and the tree. And again, minimising the footprint of the vehicles liberates the remainder of the site for safe pedestrian usage and linkages to the park, boardwalk and the lane. So all of those principles that Caroline outlined, we're enacting here. And again, a quote from the Brisbane City Centre Master Plan in this precinct and this building, which is a tower in a plaza. In terms of activating the public realm, again, there will be a lot of public park space and cafes and restaurants fronting the boardwalk, positively activating that area, and cafes fronting onto the existing laneway, which is, at the moment, I think you'll all agree if you've ever been there, quite a scary and dead space. So we think, again, giving back to the public realm in terms of creating wonderful places to be, but activating it and creating the possibilities of great surveillance and connection as well. The third element, illuminate with daylight. You know, the porous plan you can see here, and response to the aspect, facilitates the permeation of natural light throughout and shading from the sun where needed. The tower is divided, as you can see on that plan there, into sort of 4 main vertical clusters, joined only at the centre by the circulation linkways and gardens. This has proven a little bit of a challenge to Arup, but they've got it sorted now. Again, it's a non-standard building, isn't it? You know, it's sort of, you haven't got the standard kind of very heavy floor plate. We've got this openness, and it's been a structural challenge, but very, very well solved by Arup. But really critical from the point of view of achieving, as you can see on that plan, every single apartment with access to light, air and amazing views. So that's what's generated the floor plan. And one of the things I really love about this, and it's a kind of an abstract notion, but for me it relates it back to the Queenslander, is the physical expression of the building, and the form is the direct expression of the way the plan operates and the way you occupy the building. So it's not about gratuitous and decorative, you know, shaping, and form making and strange colours and things. It's an absolutely direct expression of the function of the building, and that's what's interesting and great about it. And in my mind, that connects it back to the sort of the frugality and the honesty and modesty of the Queensland House. So you can see there the images of the light and air flowing through, and then how that results in these remarkable living environments with these transcendent views to the river. And this remarkable luxury, and I was talking to the other day to some consultant friends of ours and saying, this is what we think is the new luxury. Here, we think luxury is about access to this beautiful climate, about being able to open your windows and let the air flow through. It's not about gold taps. It's not about marble. It's actually about giving everyone the opportunity, even if they're living in a dense urban environment in the centre of the city, to take advantage of and enjoy our beautiful climate and our beautiful vegetation. That to us is the new luxury. And that's what we think we should be pursuing in Brisbane, because we've got the opportunity to do it. Again, just talking about the fourth element, natural air and ventilation. I'm going to quickly run through the plans sort of from the ground up to illustrate that, and that also illustrates the next couple of elements, shade and protection. Ground plan, again, obviously incredibly open, but also protected when necessary. The car park levels, radically elevated above the ground plane to create that beautiful canopy underneath. Again, totally naturally ventilated and daylit. The benefits of that are enormous, obviously. You know, it seems nuts to us, the idea of digging a basement car park, particularly on this riverside site, throwing all those dollars into that hole, if you like, then having to mechanically light and ventilate that 24/7. That seemed like a ridiculous notion. So again, why not take advantage of these remarkable climatic conditions that we have, elevate the car park levels, and there are 6 levels of car park, and naturally light and ventilate them, thereby radically saving energy over time and make it a much more pleasant experience driving your car up there, parking, looking out at the river, seeing the planted gardens in front of you. So much nicer than burying yourself down in a sort of a shallow grave. With the risk of the river flowing into it, and we all know that that's happened, and people have lived through that. So that's just seemed like a no-brainer again. On the lid of that subtropical hanging garden, if you like, is the recreation deck. It takes the form of these decks and pools. Again, all sorts of familiar things that we like inhabiting in Queensland, beautiful cabanas, the pool edges, but all in a very lush garden setting, but up there in the subtropical air. And then up to the apartments themselves. So this is the first level of apartments, sort of a transfer level. So we needed a larger slab area there for the transfer purpose. So what we've done is planted that out with beautiful gardens as well. So just imagine coming up in the lift into the arrival gardens there between those two lift cores there, with these amazing views across greenery and past trees to the river on one side and down Queen Street to the city on the other, with natural breeze flowing around you. We think that's a pretty amazing experience. It's the kind of thing that we really enjoy, you know, living in Brisbane, and we think we can replicate that in the high-rise conditions. So I've only got 5 left, so I'll move pretty quickly through these because these are pretty self-explanatory. Just when we get to a reasonably typical floor plan, though, you can see the advantage. And this is some amalgamated apartments on this one, but every single apartment has 2, 3 or 4 open sides, so you can open your windows. Natural cross ventilation flows through. It's probably pretty hard to read on these plans, but another great move is that each house in the sky has its own service balcony. So again, another aspect of luxury that isn't about gold taps and marble. It's about being able to hang your washing out and for it to be naturally dried. So all of those things are kind of the things that we think are great ways to live in Brisbane in beautiful housing, replicating it here to give people the opportunity to live in the subtropical air in the city in that way. So that's how we think of our building, again, taking that quote from the Brisbane City Centre Master Plan. Again, explaining the benignity of having that beautiful kind of open public plaza at the ground level. Using screens tempered in different ways around the different faces of the building to provide shade and privacy throughout as well. Living greenery, again, we've spoken about it a lot, but we think landscape's not just an attractive feature, so it's not just an aesthetic thing. It's a sort of dynamic, active component of a sustainable building. Planting obviously converts carbon dioxide to oxygen and sequesters carbon from the air. Plants cool the environment. They also provide food and shelter and habitat. So this is the UH dimension of the CTBUH. So humans inhabiting the city with wildlife as well, insects and animals within the city, increasing biodiversity and reducing the ecological footprint of the city. And this particular project achieves a green plot ratio, that's the sort of planted area divided by the site area, of nearly 200%. That's interesting when you compare it to the existing building on the site, with a 5% green plot ratio. And here you see some of TCL's landscape plans. And again, just some sections of how those planters actually work and the philosophy of the planter boxes and these elevated garden beds. They're all located in easily accessible common areas only, where they'll be seen, they'll be valued and regularly maintained. So, and all of this elevated planting is grown in very simple water-efficient planter boxes designed for easy access. Some images there of some of the details around the open lobbies and garden spaces, etc., and how we achieve views and wind protection where necessary in Brisbane. So identity is an interesting one. Doesn't depend, as I said, on that sort of gratuitous shape making or layers of decoration, but it flows from a very honest, direct expression of its functional organisation, and we believe that very directly relates to how we want to live in Brisbane and the sort of architecture that precedes it. This particular project inspired very much by its context, its local context as well. So reducing energy and waste. So it is essentially a passive, low technology, high ambience design for our climate, not a standard temperate design, which is so often replicated around here. Those are appropriate for Sydney and Melbourne and New York and other places, but not for Brisbane. So it's interesting that the City of Sydney Energy Master Plan revealed that in high-rise residential, in standard high-rise residential, it's common for 60% of the energy use of the building to be contributed by the common areas, used by common areas. So this building targets that very specifically by aiming for access to natural light and ventilation for all of those areas, and radical reduction thereby of common plant areas and services where possible. All bathrooms and kitchens have openable windows, and the apartments have these laundry areas with space to dry clothes. Naturally, I think that's a luxury too. So the apartments are therefore designed to function almost all year round without heating or cooling, and that's really critical. Again, a new luxury, I think, due to the sun shading, the solar access and the cross ventilation. They are provided with air conditioning, zoned to the apartment and controlled individually. And I think this is a really important move as well, so people are not forced to live in high energy consuming air conditioned spaces. They have the choice, which we think is really important. So we've reached a really exciting stage in this project, and there's the section explaining the various energy moves and how the building operates. We've reached a really exciting stage in this project, and it means a great deal to be able to have the opportunity to sort of demonstrate these subtropical principles that we do believe in and that we're very passionate about. And we're very grateful for the passion and commitment of CBUS Property and the consultant teams working to deliver what we think is an exemplary project on an exemplary site in an exemplary city. So thank you.
The original idea was to have a bit of a panel discussion now, but our normal stage here has disappeared for some reason this week. Maybe just stand. Yeah. But having Michelle here from CBUS is a great opportunity to ask some of those key questions about how does it stack up, which would be great. It's a fascinating building. I guess as an architect, we've looked at some of the projects of Waha and Singapore. We look at the amazing wall-to-floor ratios and circulation and green zones. How does they stack it up? Obviously, we're seeing it happening now in Brisbane, so it's certainly a bold move by CBUS, which is a great site. But any insight that's making it really work?
That is another one of the rules in the it's about finding all the freezer. And to be honest with you, we did have those as well. So there's a bit of a hint earlier in that piece where there's the standard design versus what work our architect is proposing. So we asked them to test a standard design against this one very early on, and we used ourselves so we could demonstrate some feasibility. So Libby did allude to some very key clues of how we have made it stack up. The big move is the car park. Our original feasibility was based on going all over ground, and 8 levels all over ground above the Brisbane River. It's not really a smart move. I unfortunately lived through the 2011 floods at Eagle Street, so know what happens in that event. So that's a huge cost saving in itself, as well as all of the focusing on low-tech services technology, so not having to ventilate car parks, not having them naturally lit, having a common area, lobbies through the tower, working on the same principles. So there's a lot in that.
Lloyd or Brad go first.
I think the well-grown car park is a great example of how to treat that. But in the past, I've found that previously council stands for well-grown car park has been very rigid. So that's caused a lot of other issues actually with the car park in Brisbane. So part of this is the council, we actually do the notion of well-grown car park. They understood the logic, and again, as a city, of the floods, etc., particularly related to this particular site, it's been maintained to actually kind of repeat it. But also they were very happy with the proposal in terms of the way we've actually liberated that ground to remain. So that's their concern. It's what the project gives back to the city. It was absolutely critical on that site to make sure that it was a permeable site, that it did link the city to the river. So we put a lot of energy, a lot of design energy and thinking into, and I spoke about a lot of them, was absolutely minimising that footprint on the ground to heal all of that public space. And one of the ways of doing that was, lifting that canopy above the ground, and also without more car parking underneath, we were able to kind of activate the edges around underneath the kind of Green Street ground plane as well. So they saw all of the advantages of that and what it gave to the city. Those proposals, and particularly obviously the clothing of that car park structure in a hanging garden was a critical one. They did ask us to prove that up, and so a lot of thought and detailing has gone into that with the whole consultant team about how you actually make sure that these gardens are verdant, as we've shown them, and are maintained. Just to demonstrate that if stuff died, if we had another drought, and for some reason in the future the thing wasn't maintained, what would it look like without it? So we were able to demonstrate the design and how we articulated that zone there. That it was an acceptable solution and aesthetically even without it.
Can people at the back hear this? Can people at the back hear? No, you might need to speak up and shout. Yeah, or shout. Sorry, we'll try and get
Maybe we go to the microphone. Go to the microphone. Sounds good. All right, any other questions out there? I guess I have another one that it's only word of mouth. You hear lots of stories. I've heard a few stories around town about the fig tree and the relationship of the building to the fig tree. I guess looking at those plans there, the first time I've seen them, there certainly seems to be a reasonable setback to the tree, but the urban myth out there is the tree is getting squashed. I guess that's a...
Yeah, so the new building gets no closer to Customs House or the fig tree than the existing building does. So the existing entry to the car park as it is now is maintained. The line of the existing building is where our building starts. So
That's right.
the tree isn't on our site and isn't going anywhere.
It's good to know.
Yeah, we were incredibly careful to keep that same kind of crossover and car manoeuvring and not, make inroads into any of that zone at all. Yeah. Oh, can you? Yeah, did you hear that? You have to go here.
Sorry, do you want me to repeat myself?
Do you want
the
to hear
stays
that?
where it is.
Forget about the tree.
The other, I guess, interesting will be the modelling of the balconies as you get up higher, the cross ventilation. Some of the projects I've been involved in with cross ventilation, once you crack the window an inch, you certainly get a strong flow. Because how you moderate that up at level
That's right.
30 and 40.
And that's all been tested. We've got Mel Consulting on board. It was really exciting actually. This process was actually running the model through the wind tunnels in Mel Consulting in Melbourne. So it's all been designed around the specifics of the wind effects on that particular site, on that particular building. Yeah.
Look, it's been modelled probably more so than a standard building again. So it's been in the wind tunnel 5 times and tuned 5 times to make sure that we're convinced that that's not an issue for us. So MEL have rigorously done that and in conjunction with Arab again. And we're convinced it works.
But certainly in Singapore there's plenty of examples and they have similar sorts of climates. So
they don't have the wind conditions that we have here in Brisbane. It's a little bit more benign on that front. So we've had to tune our design to suit our climate.
So it doesn't sway then, obviously, Arabs would say?
Well, as you probably saw on the plans, there's large planters, so every 5 levels, and they alternate on which facade which gap they're in, if you like. So that's helping with the torsion of the building to connect the two towers, if you like.
Yeah. No, Dylan's done a remarkable job there.
It is 5 to 9, so I think on that note we probably should invite Craig up for the vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. On behalf of Aaron, I'd like to thank the CTBUH for organising this event, and of course thank our speakers, Caroline and Libby, for their insightful presentation. 50 towers in 20 years, it's quite a daunting thought, really. You know, the impact there's going to be on our skyline and the ground plane. We've basically got to get it right. There is a danger if we ignore some of this, that we could be the Atlanta of the South. There's no one here from Atlanta, is there? Oh, good. But I, for one, fully support the subtropical initiative. Real greening of buildings, you know, taking some of those cues from Singapore, and of course, One Central Park in Sydney, which won the CTBUH Best Building Award in 2015. A successful building. I did read a report recently that suggested that, you know, people in office buildings that have sight of vegetation and access to vegetation have 30% fewer sick days. So, you know, it's a bit more than a case of putting a pot plant on everybody's desk, you know, to increase profitability. This is about improving the wellness and well-being of a city. And this takes great strides towards that. And I think Goldilocks would agree, Libby. Architectural visions are one thing, but it's about, you know, making them into reality. I'd like to thank Michelle for taking the questions today, and to CBUS for not freaking out too much, and to implementing this project. It's great stuff. Would you all now please join me in thanking Libby, Caroline, Michelle for their contributions today. Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming along. Look, 1 minute to 9, we've done it again on time. And thanks to our presenters and everybody for coming along. We'll see you back here in 2 months, hopefully. Have a great day. Thanks.